But not only that, in the same dust, we find small chips of unignited thermite. This is extraordinary because this material is composed of particles that are 1,000 times smaller than the human hair, of aluminum and iron oxide. And they're perfectly uniform in relative to each other, and they're in the proportion to make up thermite, 25% aluminum to 75% iron oxide. This is called super thermite. It is made only in the most sophisticated Defense Department contracting laboratories. That's why we don't think that Al-Qaeda was the primary perpetrator here. There are plenty of reports of explosions before the onset of destruction in the basements of these buildings, curiously enough, and also below the collapsing building, there are numerous ejections at 160 to 200 feet per second of pulverized building materials shooting out of the sides of these towers. We call them squibs, or isolated ejections of pulverized building material. And a very different engineered destruction from what we see in Building 7, which was a classic internal implosion. The Twin Towers were extremely explosive, where we have pyroclastic-like clouds ejecting with outward arching streamers in a symmetry evocative of fireworks, really. We had a huge fireball. Most of the fuel, in fact, burned up 90% of it outside the buildings, and the rest was gone in 10 minutes, according to the official story. After that, we're only talking about normal office fires and damage from the jet planes. It was an hour to an hour and a half after that that the buildings began to fall, we're told, because of structural weakening due to fires. But if that's true, and we had a gravitational collapse, what we would be looking for at the bottom of both Twin Towers is about 110 floors stacked up. I would settle for 50, maybe 20. Guess how many we find down there in the photos and videos? None. Not one floor survives this incredible impact. Everything has been pulverized to fine powder. In fact, we have small metal filings in all of the dust. That is the only trace we can find of most of the 20-gauge metal decking that the concrete is poured in, and the trusses, and the file cabinets. 10,000 file cabinets are missing. No desks, no chairs. We're missing 1,000 people. Not any trace of 1,000 people. Well, what does explain that is thermite. Thermite is an incendiary used to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. It creates molten iron as its byproduct, and that molten iron is laced with manganese and it's laced with aluminum, and that's what the scientists find in the molten iron underneath all three buildings. This is evidence that was actually documented by FEMA in their Appendix C in May of 2002. The melting of steel, the hot sulfur corrosion attack on steel, intergranular melting, and rapid oxidation. Fires cannot do that. And this is Building 7 steel that they were documenting. But NIST ejected this from their report when they took over the report, and we don't have it in there anymore. So this is a part of the destruction of evidence, which the steel itself, by the way, was shipped to China for recycling before the report came out on Building 7 by FEMA in May of 2002, citing that their best hypothesis as to how this building came down, which is fire and some impact damage, has only a low probability of occurrence. The deal is that this 15-story section above the point of jet plane impacts has completely destroyed itself in what really is a classic controlled demolition for the upper portion of this building. After 4 seconds, there's nothing driving the rest of those buildings down. As I mentioned, you see a series of bands of explosions like the first responders described, tearing the building apart at 2/3 of free fall acceleration. In other words, it's accelerating straight down through the
one of the things that is said, you may dispute this, is that jet fuel that you say dissipated in 10 minutes. Is that what you're saying? It got down into the elevator shafts of both Twin Towers. Do you dispute that?
Well,
would that not explain the internal combustion of both those buildings?
No, it doesn't. What we have at the bottom of both of these buildings is several tons, pools of molten iron. Now, fires, even jet fuel fires, cannot create molten iron. Fires only get to be about 1,500 degrees. But this molten steel or molten iron, it turns out to be molten iron, as the scientists tell us. It's not even created until about 3,000 degrees. What in the world could create 3,000-degree pools of molten iron? Well, if that's true, they should be willing to release the input data for these, and FOIA requests have been denied again and again. Do you know what the answer to most of these FOIA request denials are? That it could jeopardize public safety. That's what they use to keep their data in this black box that is completely secretive. This is not an open investigation at all. And their computer models do not explain any of the evidence that we've been talking about tonight. The evidence has to be responded to. Where does this nanothermite, superthermite, sophisticated military-grade explosive come from? Why is it in all the World Trade Center dust? Do you think a 47-story skyscraper built in the 1980s, like Building 7, could come down in 6.5 seconds at free-fall acceleration without those columns being sequentially removed?
Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, but frankly, if there weren't some sort of help to bring those buildings down, a controlled blast, if you will, they would have just sort of toppled over, correct? Did we lose them?
Extremely redundant, robust structures, and our 40 structural engineers that are signed on to our petition demanding a new investigation would disagree with our previous caller, Mike, that a building can fall straight down through the 40,000 tons of steel as if it weren't even there. The laws of physics are such that the building has to slow down if it's going to crush steel on the way down, but it did not. And NIST acknowledges that it did not, but they do not acknowledge the implications of a free-falling structure. And by the way, your listeners can download this evidence from our website, which is AE911truth.org. That stands for Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And it can be downloaded, and the DVD is available there to watch also. So I would encourage everybody to familiarize yourselves more with this evidence. And I completely agree with the caller that providing this evidence, which is really evidence of treason if you think about it, because I agree with Pat that this is obviously some sort of an inside operation. We just don't know who exactly is responsible, but it amounts to treason nonetheless. So we're asking everybody to submit it to their judge so it can go through the proper channels. We're working for the family members right now. We have the Jersey girls signed on to our website. Numerous family members are asking of us to get at the truth of the death of their loved ones, and only that truth will heal these family members. And there was obviously some sort of cover-up. This has proven that to us. That's why we're calling for a federal grand jury investigation of Sean Thunder, the lead investigator of NIST, and his co-project leader, John Gross. What we know about the Pentagon is that there were dozens and dozens of cameras that would have shown us what did or didn't hit the Pentagon. And the fact that they haven't been released, except for these 5 very controversial frames, is proof that there is a cover-up. What should have been released is the videos from the hotel and the gas station and the Pentagon, the first 2 being confiscated within 5 or 10 minutes of the actual crash by the FBI. Many people do ask, well, how could somebody have gotten explosives in there? After all, there's tens of thousands of occupants. They would have seen something. But the interesting thing is, if you had access to the core elevator shafts, you would have access to the core columns and beams in the building and could plant these explosives without being seen by the occupants. And it turns out, in fact, that we had the largest elevator modernization in history going on in those two buildings the 9 months prior to 9/11. Ace Elevator had the contract, and so we want an investigation of them as well as the security company, Securicom and Stratasec. Find it at ae911truth.org.